GURPS is known as a very crunchy system, even though you can adjust the level of crunch to have something more rules-light. If you look at the monthly GURPS news, you'll see the following. I'll remind people again that we presently want rules-light, fluffy content, more than the rules-heavy, crunchy kind. This has been reiterated by Sean Punch on the SJ Games forums for the last few years. GURPS is trying to stay away from crunch now, because writing crunch is difficult, editing crunch is difficult, and that less crunchy systems sell much better. In the online discussion, the term crunch nowadays carries negative connotations. Crunch is considered something bad, something to avoid. I have seen many times people say that GURPS Lite is too crunchy, and I have even seen people say that D&D 5e is too crunchy, and they want something lighter. While I don't have a problem with people playing lighter systems, as it's all a matter of preference, I would like to explain my point of view, as I am a crunch lover. I think I should say that I did play some rules light and almost free-form games, and from my experience they all had a common problem. When there are no clearly defined rules for certain situations, the GM tells the player how it will work and what he has to roll. Then the situation comes up again later, but for another player, and the GM does the same. However, this time the ad hoc mechanical resolution is different. The first player now is upset. Why does it work differently for the other guy? Then an argument arises, and all three people usually are mad as a result. As a player, you never feel on equal ground with others. Also, when you do not have clear rules, you often feel like you don't even have much agency. You're not a player but a spectator in a GM's story. Even in crunchy games, the GM is the final arbiter, but as a player you're still on the same page as the GM and you understand why the GM does what he does. Everyone is playing by the same rules, and as a result, you are much more invested in the game. I know that it probably will upset the OSR enthusiasts, but I believe that rulings, not rules, isn't the way to go. After all, if you want to incentivize the players to interact with the environment, they should have a consistent set of rules to know what to expect. What is a rule if not a ruling that was written down because it comes up often? An even more important aspect of crunch to me is that it makes decisions matter. And the entire game depends on that, decisions and their consequences. For example, one thing that has been bothering me back in the D&D 3.5 days was that helmets do not do anything. To be even more precise, you couldn't even get a mundane helmet separately. Helmets come as part of an armor suit. Even if you find a magical helmet, it doesn't actually do anything to protect you. It didn't affect your armor class in any way. This means that wearing helmets doesn't matter, they do not do anything unless enchanted. Thus, in D&D, if you decide to take off your helmet, it doesn't matter. In GURPS, if you decide against wearing a helmet, you significantly compromise your defenses, because you can target hit locations. On the other hand, many helmets in GURPS reduce your hearing or restrict your arc of sight. Thus, wearing a helmet is a meaningful decision, as it comes both with upsides and downsides. The type of helmet also becomes important. Do you want a skull cap or a full helm? Do you want to pad it? Or perhaps you want to attach a nose guard to your skull cap? This seems like a minor detail, but when this nose guard saves you from a facial injury and a potential knockout, you will be glad that you made this decision. Another fun moment from a game that I'm playing in right now. One of the characters is a warforged staff fighter. He is extremely skilled in fighting with a quarterstaff, and even decided to commission a full metal staff to be made for him, to deal even more damage. In the most recent fight, an enemy sorceress buffed one of her companions with a lightning armor spell. In this fight, the warforged player realized that the weapon composition actually matters, as the full metal staff conducts electricity. This seemingly minor thing played a major role in the fight. This also highlights something important. Crunch must be meaningful. Writing crunch just for the sake of having crunch usually is not the way to go. For example, let me come up with a new game mechanic. Every time a character attempts to cross the road, roll 1d20. If you roll a 1, there is a drunk driver on the road. If this is the case, the character must make a perception check to spot the driver. If he succeeds, he may attempt a dexterity check to avoid the car. If he fails, he gets hit by the car. What an excellent addition to any crunchy system! While it does tackle a realistic situation, is this really something you want to include in your game? It does give the player another decision to make. Should they cross the road? But this kind of decision isn't something that I want to include in the game. This is what GURPS calls a nuisance roll. Instead of increasing player agency, it subtracts from it. My previous points were system agnostic, but this one is going to be GURPS specific. GURPS is not a reality simulator, but is grounded in reality. Thus, the crunches more often than not simply make sense. This has many benefits. Let's compare it to D&D. In D&D, you roll a d20 to attack, add appropriate modifiers, and if you hit, you roll damage. The GM or the player may describe this attack in great flashy details, as you swing your sword, penetrate the enemy orc's armor and sever his neck artery, causing him to quickly bleed out and lose consciousness. But in terms of mechanics, every attack is the same, regardless of your description. In GURPS, you can actually decide to stab the orc in the gut, try to sever the aforementioned neck artery, or try to break his hand to disarm him. Due to specific rules, wounding multipliers, modifiers, etc., all these attacks work differently and have different effects. Not only does this make combat more visceral, but it yet again makes every decision meaningful. In addition, you do not have to strain your imagination and come up with a flashy description for every attack. The description and the story write themselves. When crunch is grounded in reality and makes sense, it also makes it easier to expand it with new rules, because the underlying principles are similar. For example, in my video about difficult terrain, I complained about rules for slipping on ice always knocking you prone. I can easily expand them. Now, when you roll against dexterity to avoid falling, if you fail by 1, you assume a kneeling posture, and if you fail by 2, you assume a sitting posture. Only a more severe failure knocks you prone. This does not add any new rolls, so it doesn't really slow down the game. Crunch is often denounced for making it difficult to keep track of things. For the most part, I agree. In D&D 3.5 or Pathfinder, it was very difficult to keep track of all the feats, class features, spells and magic items. When crunch is grounded in reality, like in GURPS, this stops being a problem. GURPS crunch is much more easy to digest because it's not abstract. You are unlikely to have something like +1 to attack rolls against fire subtype creatures, even though it is possible to make such an ability in GURPS. As a consequence, I find GURPS games much easier to run and prepare for. Yes, GURPS is much crunchier than Pathfinder, but the difference from the GM's side is like night and day. GM in Pathfinder and D&D was a chore, but running GURPS is a breeze despite the crunch. One other aspect that I'd like to mention is social crunch. Many people believe that rules for social interactions aren't necessary, as you can simply roleplay them. On one hand, it does make sense, but on the other hand, what if you, the player, aren't good at that sort of stuff but your character is? This point is explained much better than I would ever be able to on page 73 of GURPS Social Engineering. This section of the book is called Throw Away This Book. I highly recommend you read it. So that's it. I made this video because I think that crunchy systems get a lot of undeserved flack, at least nowadays, and I wanted to explain what makes crunch appealing to me personally. Crunch is something that I am looking for in a system, and it makes it so much easier to get immersed into the game world and get invested into the game in general. Navigating the intricate rule set is part of the fun for me, it's not a chore. What makes GURPS particularly special here is that it can be adapted to any level of crunch that you want. If you do not want to deal with some rules, just don't use them. You are the architect of your own enjoyment. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.